Hey guys, welcome back to Green Thread. I am your host, Alexis,
And I'm Allie.
and today we're going to be talking about the role of plants in medicine. So, for your fun fact today, did you know that approximately 25% to 40%, even on some websites, of prescriptions dispensed in the United States are derived directly from plants?
I'm gonna act surprised. Wow, that's so
This is the part where
wild.
you're shocked. I found that whenever I was kind of initially doing research for the episode, and I think that is really freaking cool in the modern age and this age of medical technology to have that
Yeah,
statistic.
that's insane. Well, kind of giving a history on medicine because we were talking about plants medicine. Why is that important to know? So, traditional medicine, or as I'm gonna be referring to it as TM, is kind of a term to describe systems like in Chinese, Indian, Arabic, U.S. All kinds of systems in medicine, and they're different in different countries too. This is why I
Mhm.
was like kind of giving you some examples, which I'm not sure if you had this fact, but I did find that the origins of traditional medicine date back to the Paleolithic era, about
Mm.
60,000 years ago, which, what?
Yeah, that's pretty insane. I kind of found a little bit of the history when I was doing my research for this episode, and I really like it's fascinating that plants have been used medicinally for thousands of years. Like
Yeah,
before modern technology, before modern medicine, we used plant. I mean, what else were you supposed to do? You couldn't go
right.
to a hospital and get, the orange bottle with the label on it. You didn't get that. You just had to use what you could. And I mean, it was a lot of trial and error, I'm sure,
Right.
for a lot of early civilizations. And like you said, you mentioned some different cultures do it differently. Egyptian and Native
Mm-hmm.
American are other ones that I found as well. But I wanted to mention Hippocrates.
Oh,
He is
yes.
deemed the father of medicine because he was really focused on the shift from superstition and magic to rationality and okay, what is this actually going to do? And just he just was a big game changer of a mindset in the medical field, not necessarily specifically for plants and medicine, but just to move forward in the medical world in general. And that's why we also have the Hippocratic Oath, is because he
Yeah.
was a lot focused. He was solely focused on ethics as well. So that was definitely a big thing that came from him too, as well as documenting different plant uses that different plants had. He would document, okay, this plant does this and this one does this for medicinal purposes.
That's wild. And I love how you brought in father of pharmacology because we talked about father and mother of all kinds of different
Hmm.
things. And in fact, I think because I saw that father figure, and I also saw there was one called I'm gonna butcher this.
Is it Greek or something? Yeah,
Yes,
okay. Yes.
Sorites. He was a military physician. But I think the difference was that he was a pharmacognosist, which is a scientist in plant pharmacology that study medicinal properties of plants. So that's a definition for you. But he was studying medicinal plants when he was in the Roman army.
Okay.
So I wonder, like, if like they were working in conjunction at the same, like around the same time. I'm not really sure when these guys were alive, so just please don't like take that into factual evidence. But like, that's crazy how there's multiple different people who are kind of like finding out these things, especially that early, and
Yes.
not to mention like a lot of more modern or like well, in fact, let me just read this because I was about to butcher what I was saying. The use of bioactive natural products as a modern drug discovery or development it only started in the 19th century, according to Verisham, which I can put in the reference to, which he also found that 11% of the 252 basic drugs have flowering plant origins. So which doesn't sound like a lot. Like if you were to kind of do 11% of 252, I think it's 27, I think
Hmm.
is what I found. But that's still a lot. And the basis of like how many drugs we have now, and
Hmm.
especially considering like how many things that we probably take on a daily basis, or like if we have pain or just relief sort of medicines that all originate from flowering plants.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to build on that, I wanted to give some examples
Yeah.
of medicines that are plant derived. So, some common examples that people would know: aspirin comes from willow bark, which contains salicin, which it can be synthesized into acetyl salicylic acid, which is aspirin. So that's one that I've heard of before. People saying, you can chew
Yeah.
on bark, which please don't take this as like, oh, let's go to the woods and chew on some bark.
So good and tasty?
Yeah.
will make our headache or our knee injury or whatever feel better, because that is not what I'm saying. Please be careful out in the wild when you forage. That's a whole nother, that could be a whole other episode.
Yeah.
Another example would be morphine, codeine, any type of opiate comes from an opium poppy. It can be incredible for severe pain. It's incredibly efficient for very severe pain. If you go through a surgery or any type of intense medical treatment, then they often use something like that. But it can be very dangerous for addiction reasons, which is
Right.
why it's not used for just any type of pain. And then there's we're getting into the ones I can't pronounce. I'm not a doctor or a nurse or in the medical field for a reason. Uh, quinine or quinine, it's Quinine. That comes from the cinchona tree, or I guess that's how you say that. That was the first effective treatment for malaria.
Oh, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then digoxin, which comes from the foxglove plant, can be used to treat cardiac issues, but it can be extremely toxic in uncontrolled doses or in very high doses. So you do have to be very careful with this stuff, which is why, like, I just wonder what it must have been like in those very early civilizations when it's like, okay, we just have to experiment and see what makes us feel better,
Right.
or what does this do to my body? And you'd have no idea. And it's very unfortunate, I'm assuming, for a lot of cases because they didn't know how much to take or how much to eat or how much to, extract. So
Yeah.
it could be a very dangerous game very quickly, but it's been extremely helpful in modern to get to modern medicine.
Yeah. And that's a lot of different like types of drugs that I feel like are used so long and over so many amount of years that like you kind of wonder, where are these plants and how many of these plants are here and how do we access those plants? Like there's a lot of different questions that can come from, how medicine is made from plants. And in fact, I have a statistics for you as well. 40%, which I think you mentioned in your
Mhm.
fun fact of modern medicines derived from plants. If you wanted to hear more about that fun fact, go watch our YouTube. And but then also found that 80% of people worldwide use traditional herbal medicines.
Mm.
So it's like pretty common. And then also that brought me into this whole rabbit hole of the term modern pharmacy because there's a lot of this is an ongoing topic. Like we're
Yeah.
not just talking about this as it's in the past now it's already been discovered and whatever. Like it's still continuing to this day because we were learning more and more about medicinal uses of current plants and like what we can take from them. So the term modern pharmacy is patient-centered healthcare. It's a profession that preps and disperses medications.
Okay.
So that's kind of just like a way to tie this into like present day and how this, topic and problem the problem's gonna come in the later part of the episode, but like just the topic in general is still something we need to like learn about and understand because people are still trying to understand it to this
Yeah.
day. Um, which I didn't mention this when we were talking about the history, but I think this is just a cool like perspective. According to Petroska, the oldest written evidence of medicinal plants in prep of drugs has been found on a Sumerian clay slab from Nagpur 5,000 years ago.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
I'm like, oh, that
Mhm.
was just the last like bit of history that I thought of.
Mhm.
But speaking of people who like find these things and like learn about them and kind of study them, there are a couple different terms that you'll probably hear when you are researching, if you ever do kind of get interest from this, about medicinal properties in plants, which is one of them is called ethnobotany, which is the study of traditional knowledge and practices of people related to plants. And that could be a big cultural thing. So like each
Mhm.
tribe that's, started with holistic, uses of medicine, a lot of them either, derived or became a influence of ethnobotanists. And also there was another term that I will mention later when it comes up, but that's one of the main ones I saw. They also
Mhm.
combine cultural studies with botany and anthropology. That way we can understand how plants are used in various cultures too. So there's a lot of symbolism that goes in with using plants as medicine.
Absolutely. And I wanted to just talk a little bit on the process of going from a plant to a pill or from a plant to medicine that we receive, because clearly in today's time, we don't just pick the plant or we don't go to the pharmacy and receive some leaves in a bag to chew up or whatever. So I don't know the process specifically. I'm not a person that is a in the medical field. I don't do this, but they basically are very guided by indigenous knowledge in this process too. To mention to kind of start that process, and these scientists or these people that work with plants for medicinal uses, they test extracts for biological activities. So, what would this do to this cell colony, or what would this
Yeah.
do to this body part, or whatever it may be. And they also test for, like, they do isolations of specific compounds to see, okay, well, this plant made this activity happen, but what specifically in this plant made that happen? Was it uh this chemical or this one? Was it this natural process or this one? So they have
Yeah.
to isolate those things to know specifically what happened. And then also determining the chemical structure of that, because that can help with synthesis to make it artificially versus getting it naturally, because there can be a lot of challenges, which I'll mention in a few minutes when we get to it. Because there's also, yeah, that's in my notes. Okay, I'm perfect. Synthetic versus natural. Um just taking what we know from the natural world and being able to replicate that, can be very helpful as well when we don't have access to the natural world all the time.
That's a really cool like point to make because I didn't even think about that and just how we've been able to influence this area of science in
Mhm.
so many different ways and I don't know, it's just crazy. I
Mhm.
mean, you see synthetic stuff in any other form of science, I guess, but like I would have just thought, like you were kind of funnily like explaining about having leaves in a bag and
Yeah.
how like just thinking about that like gets me my little internal.
Gears turning.
Yeah, yeah. Which I feel like, we always kind of try to do the method where we like talk to you about what it is. We also give you maybe some pros and some cons, and I'm gonna touch on the cons first because I feel like we should end on a good note.
Mhm.
So some downsides to traditional medicine are just like, the idea of medicinal use of plants. One big one that I feel like a lot of people might think of first would be maybe biodiversity loss,
Mhm.
considering how like we were talking about how many plants are used in medicine could probably lead to the fact that we want to take it and use it, and a lot of people, some people, especially when it comes to like social stressors with these medicines, maybe be like addiction or just like having to do it for an injury, like you were saying, like
Mhm.
there's a lot of different ways that humans can require something at such a large volume that we need a lot of production of said thing. So that could probably, contribute to biodiversity loss, especially when it comes to climate change. And I saw that, well, to give you an idea of how important and crucial the biodiversity is in the grand scheme of things, it helps to mitigate stressors like climate change that by absorbing roughly 2.6 billion tons of CO2 annually. So losing that at such a alarming rate, especially with plants, is causing a 10 to 100 times increase in species extinction across some of these
Wow.
medicines or plants that are being used for medicinal use, especially with overexploitation, sustainable practices, and everything to do with sustainability on the plant's part. Because about 35,000 to 70,000 plant species are used globally for medicine. So over 5 million metric tons are used of those or collected, harvested annually. So if you think of all that and like
Mhm.
doing that exponentially, like it's just gonna get worse and
Worse
worse.
and worse. Yeah, and I was going to mention that in my challenges was biodiversity loss as a huge thing, because let's say some ultra rare plant is what we need for this specific
Right.
compound, or this is the only plant in this area that makes a specific compound. Okay, we harvest all that. Okay, now what? So that's why
Exactly.
it's important to have synthetic ways to recreate this, as well as ethically sourcing
Yes.
these plants, especially with going back to indigenous knowledge. If we indigenous knowledge probably comes from indigenous lands, so we don't want to infringe on their rights and their lands just for the purpose of taking all their plants and then leaving. That's not very
Exactly.
ethical of us. So there's more examples with that as well, but just keeping good ethics in mind when
Right.
doing any type of scientific discipline, but specifically going and extracting something from an area, you have to be extremely careful with that.
Exactly. And some ways for you to be able to do that, because we're talking about it and we're like, okay, then how do I do it?
Mhm.
We got you.
Mhm.
Some ways that you can support medicinal plant conservation would be through promoting sustainable harvesting practices, raising awareness, just even talking about it is helpful.
Mhm.
I don't, this is something you'd have to check with your state regulations, but some people do cultivate these medicine or these plants at home. So rather than having to, buy them in kind of a synthetic way,
Mhm.
like you were talking about, and then also contributing to seed banking, which is basically just conserving seeds through genetic, modifications or like having special uh growth. I don't know the exact terminology for it, but you're basically doing it in a controlled environment so that you're able to kind of protect that seed, and so it's not like you have all these different resources that you don't aren't just like putting in the ground, and then they can be taken away from environmental factors. And also one more last thing is support local communities. And
Mhm.
that's a big one for anything, and that can go into biodiversity and for
Oh,
plant
yeah.
medicine. But just like those are some ways that you at home can contribute to that, because we always talk about how some things can be taken for granted by us.
Yes,
And
yes, very
so
much so.
so yeah, that's kind of some points I wanted to make.
Absolutely. And this is just barely scratching the surface of this topic. We know that the knowledge of medicinal plants and their uses and where they came from and how they were discovered, that comes from a long line of knowledge. And that's a long history that we have yet to even discover.
Yep, awesome. Well, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time.